It's a magic trick. So over the weekend, the Jan and Marie and I watched an interesting show. Highly recommended by a good friend of ours. And the name of the show is Jewish Matchmaking. Now, growing up in Nebraska in the Midwest, did not have a lot of Jewish friends. Not by choice or divinity, but just, I think, because of proximity. There are not a lot of Jews in the Midwest. Now, there were temples. The old University of Nebraska Theater building used to be a temple. It's called the Temple Building. There was another beautiful apartment building that used to be a temple. And it's a small building close to the university campus. And the most magnificent thing is the people who lived in the top floor of this former church, now apartment building, had their entire ceiling as a stained glass window from the church or the temple, whatever it was. And it was the most magnificent thing you've ever seen. And the people who lived there knew that, and people who knew that they were in that apartment would bring their friends over to show them the incredible, beautiful ceiling. And I remember a friend of mine took me over there. She lived there at the time in a different apartment. And she went up there and said, "Are you guys home?" And they said, "Yes." And they said, "Hey." It's okay. So what we did is we went up to their apartment. I think it was the third floor, walked all the way up. My friend opened the door, and there were like 3 people in the living room. And they were all bathed in this beautiful light that was shining down on them from the stained glass, watching TV. And I just looked at it. I looked at them. You know, they waved, I waved. I could tell they were watching a movie. And then I looked up. Their whole ceiling was a stained glass window, and it was curved. It wasn't a flat piece of stained. It was a dome of stained glass. I've never seen anything like it before. Or since. And so then my friend said, "Okay." And I said, "Oh." And then she closed the door and we left. So I was there watching this delight for maybe 45 seconds. And I really did feel we were interrupting them. But I know that when you rent a place like that, you know you're going to be interrupted because it's the most magnificent piece of art that people have hanging as their ceiling in the living room. And then, you move to New York, and there are a lot of Jews in New York. And there are observant Jews, strict Jews, used to be Jews, people who were not Jewish become Jewish. You learn some of the rules. If the mother is Jewish, the children are Jewish no matter what. And as we learned from this show we were watching, that there are 2, I don't even know what we call them, systems, divisions, strains of Jews, Jewishness. The Ashkenazi Jew, who tends to be European, and the Sephardic Jew, who tends to be more, I guess, Asian. And it's very important. And the Ashkenazi don't really get along with the Sephardic and the other way around, but they do because we're all Jews, but you're not the same Jew. A lot of rules. A lot of religions do have a lot of rules. And the decision on if you are Sephardic or Ashkenazi is decided by, according to this show, the parent that is the father. The parent that is the mother decides if the baby is Jewish or not Jewish, and then the father's line determines Sephardic or not, and the mother's line does not matter. That's how I understand it as a godforsaken Methodist from Nebraska. So the show is called Jewish Matchmaking. It's on Netflix. Over the weekend, we watched all 8 episodes, half an hour each. So that's 4 hours of our lifetime that we can never get back again. And the idea, I guess there was originally an Indian dating show like this that people thought was very interesting and culturally challenging and okay. And so they decided to go ahead and have this, which was made like a year ago, which is Jewish Matchmaking. And there are 8 episodes. Aliza Ben Shalom is, I guess, the matchmaker. She's the host, if that's what you want to call it. When Jewish singles are ready to get serious, they call on Aliza Ben Shalom to find their perfect romantic match from across the U.S. and Israel. And here are the episodes. And we watched them all. And here's what I take away from this. The Jewish religion is completely fantastic and fascinating. This image, I don't think, is very representative of the show. This is like the last episode. This is a black woman who is Jewish because of her mother, and this is a kind of a nerdy white guy who is also a Jew. And here are some takeaways that I have from that show. The matchmaker is really quite a wonderful and delightful person. At least for episodes 1 and 2, where she explains her mission and what she does and how she's doing, this important work. And then by episode 8, she's saying exactly the same things. And when you look at the arc of the story of her matchmaking from episode 1 to episode 8, you just can't get over the fact that it was a total and complete failure. She didn't hook up anybody. No marriages. And this was filmed, a year and a half ago. So you'd think if there were successes, there would have been some sort of update, added to, they got married a month ago, or they have 2 children and they're married for something like that. There's no update. And there's no connection. Which might be the way things go today. How sad things are that you really can't find a connection any longer. But what was the most interesting thing is the people she was finding matches for were generally unlikable. You just watched them and really didn't like them. Not because of their religion. The religion's fantastic. The traditional rituals, great. It's their personality. You understand why they don't have anybody. You understand why they're not connected. So then she goes out, this matchmaker goes out and finds what turns out to be really sort of wonderful people who are much nicer, kinder, smarter, better people than the people that she is trying to match them with originally, the consumer, the client, right? So the people coming into the show to date these people are overwhelmingly, generally speaking, much more attractive and interesting than the people that Aliza is trying to match, which makes for a very frustrating show because you have these lead people, at least in the early episodes, that you really don't like very much. And then later on, you get this woman, and there was another person who was funny. Stuart was his name. Funny guy, wonderful. You'd love to have him as a friend. And there was one woman that I found most fascinating out of all of them. And she was 30 years old and very strict, super observant. Most of them sort of, respect Shabbat in many ways. Sundown Friday to, sundown Saturday. Everything's off. So this woman, as a Jewish friend of mine would say, is a super Jew. Doesn't mean you're observant. It means that everything that is good and right and moral in the world belongs to you and you alone, and you will fix the world and bend it to your will. And my friend was self-identifying as the original super Jew. And he told me this when we were walking on the street. And it just happened to be the Diamond District, which doesn't have anything to do with this story. And we were, talking about something, and we were following a guy who was handing out pamphlets, flyers, which is very common in a big city. And this guy was not handing them to people. He was, holding them out to people, and if the people didn't take it, the guy would drop the piece of paper and it would fall on the floor, on the sidewalk. And we watched, as we're talking, my friend and I, this guy dropping these papers. Well, okay, that's New York. Well, my friend didn't agree with that. He yelled at the guy, said, "Stop throwing the papers." The guy stopped, threw all the rest of the papers he had in his hand. He threw them in a garbage can. And my friend walked back and picked up every single piece of paper that guy dropped over the last block, which I would say is like 150 pieces of paper. Individual, and my friend's kind of a big fat guy, bending down, picking up the pieces of paper, throwing them away. And I was shocked by the whole thing. And, he didn't ask me to pick up the pieces of paper, but I did. And we upped him, we threw it all away. And I kind of looked at him like, what was that about? And he said, well, the guy was littering. And I don't want that in New York City. I asked him to stop. And I went back and cleaned up after him. And then that's when he told me that, yes, I am super Jew, and this is what I believe, and this is how I behave, and I always try to do the right thing. Now, if you knew the guy, you knew that maybe 70% of that was true, because he turned out to sort of be a big fake and a phony. But in that moment, it was an interesting learning moment for me, and I've always sort of been wary of saying the word super Jew, because it may be used out of context and people might not always understand what you're trying to say, which sometimes is nothing new. So in this Jewish matchmaking show, there is this 30-year-old woman, doesn't appear to ever had a serious relationship, let alone a boyfriend. She says she's a successful, marketing person. I can't remember. But the point is that she is very strict, she is very religious, very observant, and she will not compromise on her religious beliefs as a Jewish woman. And it's also very interesting when the matchmaker, meets with these people to match up, that the mother of the person is usually always there, observing, giving their feedback. It's very interesting. So the matchmaker, finds this really charming, fun, funny, smart, devoted Jewish man. And I think he's maybe 26 and she's 30, so there's a little bit of an age difference there. And she says she knows that she's old in the Jewish world, because where she was raised, if you're not married with kids by 22, you're not doing it right. And, if you're a 22-year-old, young man, you're not looking to marry a 30-year-old woman. You're looking to marry someone 22 or younger because youth is very valuable, because they want to have children. So this woman knows that her time is running out, but she doesn't seem to have any sense of urgency or desperation. She's perfectly happy with who she is and how she is, which is great. We all should be so lucky. And so this young man comes in and, they go out and they're laughing and they have a good time and they're eating ice cream. And, then things that happen behind our backs as the viewers gets revealed to us as their story progresses. And it seems that when he dropped her off the first night after their date, that she did some kind of religious ritual, praying. He wasn't very specific about it. And he thought that was a little strange because he didn't think she was that strict, where she, prayed 3 times a day. And then we see this kind of invented scene where he's there talking to his rabbi, which is a wonderful, wonderful scene. And he's, expressing himself and saying, look, I don't know if this is really going to work out because she is very, very hardcore religiously, and I'm not. I'm sort of a fun guy who, jokes around, and I'm perfectly happy to be observant, but I know that I cannot be as strictly observant as she is demanding that I be. And the rabbi was very nice, and he said, well, look, you can change, she can change. There's a negotiation in marriage. Don't throw it all away unless you really know. And then they kind of skip time, and later we find out that the two of them had a conversation that we were not privy to, where they both kind of said, look, you're hardcore, I'm not. You're too soft, I'm hardcore. Let's call the whole thing off. And they just decided not to see each other anymore, which was very weird because everything that we saw was perfect. They were the perfect couple. And in some ways, I feel very relieved for the young man because he knew he was getting into something that he could not tolerate, something that concerned him that he could not be a part of. And the young woman, he just had to, in many ways, pity her because, as it comes across in the show, she is so rigid and so strict that she is using her religious beliefs as a shield so that she doesn't have to commit to a man or a woman, not a woman, as a woman. She uses her very strict upbringing, belief system, as an excuse to not have a relationship because nobody in her eyes is good enough for her. Now you watch and you think, well, who would be good enough for her? And you think, well, it's not going to be a 22-year-old because they're not going to be interested in her. And you're thinking, well, it would be someone who's older, 50, 60, 72-year-old, strict religious man who has already had his children and maybe widowed or alone, but very strict, very observant. And he would, I guess, accept such a woman, unmarried and untethered at the age of 30. But is that the life she wants? I don't think so. Everything that I read is that I read from her in watching the show is that she doesn't want to be married. She's not interested in having children. She's perfectly happy living alone with her mother for as long as it takes. And the longer time goes on, the easier it will be for her to say, no one lived up to my expectation. I don't really need children. I'm doing fine on my own. I'm a successful person. I've now reached the age where I cannot have children. And it's interesting to know that once you hit 35, in the medical community, you are considered geriatric. A woman having a baby at 35 is called a geriatric pregnancy. So this woman who, claims she wants children, wants to have a family of her own and get married is 30. And now she's probably 31 or 32. And I think if she were married or had somebody, they would have updated her story and said, hey, she found somebody and they're married. So you ask yourself, why are these people on the show? There's another guy who, lives in Tel Aviv, which I guess is the party town. If you're a serious Jew, you live in Jerusalem. But if you're a party Jew and a F-boy, as they call them, then you live in Tel Aviv. And there's this pretty boy who doesn't want to settle down, dates beautiful women. His mother is some kind of ambassador. He doesn't want to settle down with one woman. And that's the feeling you get from these people. These people want to be on the show to talk about their lives, and they don't really care if they get married or not. There doesn't seem to be an urgency among any of them, which is fine, but why go to a matchmaker if you're not serious about finding a way to be matched? So that's my rant on Netflix's show, Jewish Matchmaking.